Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Magnetic Podcast. Super excited today to have my good friend on, Brandon Amoroso, founder at Electriq. Brandon, first of all, thank you so much for being here. Would love if you could introduce yourself, Electriq, what you guys do. I also know you have some recent or semi-recent news with the company. Love to hear about that. And we'll just get right into it.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me on. I started Electriq back in 2018 when I was going to school out in LA at USC, just sort of like freelancing for small businesses in and around the LA area that were selling on Shopify. Was able to get it to a point where right before graduation, turned it into like a quote unquote real agency and brought on a full-time team member. And then we scaled to about 50 people over the next 2.5 years. And then the eventual acquisition by drinks.com in April of last year. And our specialization ended up becoming customer experience and retention marketing. So a big Klaviyo partner with architecting all the email, SMS, push notification, and direct mail flows, especially post-purchase to improve customer retention. And then had a pretty sizable web design and development team, building out the front-end experiences and doing some light CRO work and AOV boosting tactics and stuff like that. And so now still, overseeing the agency, but with the acquisition, working very closely with Shopify on the alcohol vertical. So Drinks has a embed app in the checkout that powers the tax and compliance for all alcohol merchants that are selling on the platform. So if you're a winery and you want to use the Shopify platform now, you can, because all the tax and compliance all the way down to the zip code is handled by the Drinks app, which the alcohol industry is a nightmare and could be an entirely different podcast that we could do. And then I have an HR tech company that launches in a few weeks that my brother has been building since around April of last year too. That's focused on hiring in the e-com space.
And that's Parker, right?
Yeah. Parker, the younger Amoroso.
Yeah, that's great. I love that you guys were tag teaming it. So for context, people listening, I met Brandon at a conference out in Cleveland and got to meet him and his brother. I will say, as someone who has a younger brother, I do envy that. I think that's really cool that you guys kind of kick it together and you guys are both super entrepreneurial, it sounds like.
We'll see how cool it lasts, but yes, it's been fun for now.
All right.
As soon as the product launches and then shit hits the fan, we'll see what really happens.
That's good though. That's good. So here's the question I have is, you're in college. It sounds like, so you started this at USC, right? Electriq. Yeah. So when I was in college, I was not thinking about starting a business. I was thinking of a lot of other things. But what made you, what kind of kicked that off? Like, I'm actually curious as to, when did you decide, like, did you know agencies were a thing and you're like, hey, this is a cool opportunity? Or was there like a specific problem that you saw that you noticed might need someone to solve it?
Yeah, I mean, I had internships throughout high school and then I took a gap year, an impromptu gap year in between high school and college to work at an e-com direct-to-consumer wine business. So I was already familiar with marketing and being young and even remotely technologically literate. Most people 20, 30 years older would just sort of look to you to be the one to do like the social shit or whatever else they needed to get done. So I was already doing that, and then I took a class at USC in their digital entrepreneurship, which was like program, which was a offshoot of the engineering school or something. But basically, it was an SEO marketing class, and the guy who was teaching the class had an SEO agency, and he was doing rather well for himself for what I viewed as nothing that was really that complicated. So basically, I was just like, well, if this guy can do it, like I can do it, and I will do it even better. And also, being in school, really was just looking for a way to make money, and then the emphasis, especially in the entrepreneurial school, was all around, big ideas, like crazy. We're going to go raise a bunch of money and we're going to have this ridiculous moat and, nobody's going to be able to do what we do. But, the vast majority of businesses in America are small businesses, and most of them are doing, similar things to what other small businesses are doing. And I figured, why not just start an agency? So that's sort of how it came to be. And I always clashed with my, my professor at the time in the entrepreneurship school, because he was like, what makes you different than other agencies? I was like, dude, there's like literally thousands of marketing agencies. Obviously, there's some secret sauce and process and whatnot, but a lot of it comes down to some of the intangibles and just the presentation and sales and messaging and things like that. So literally no cost to start it either, which was the biggest thing for me. And it's ironic because now I'm trying to do, the thing that they were always preaching, go build a really ridiculous like tech company and have patents and have something that's very defensible. But it honestly just started because I thought I could do a better job than my teacher was doing the agency.
That's great. Yeah. So it sounds like you might be a little competitive. That's great. So tell me a little bit about like when you started the agency, what was sort of like the gap that you had identified, or what was sort of the need, or was it like, hey, there's people that need this and don't have it, or I can just do it better? What was sort of that initial like offering that you kind of came in the door with some of these brands?
So a lot of the Shopify agencies at the time had gotten massive off of the growth of Facebook ads in like the 2010 to 2015 period. And you had some exits like Mute 6, and they were just too large. So anywhere between, say, 150 to 500 employees, maybe even more. And they had gotten fat and happy off of the fact that you could just turn on Facebook ads and you would acquire a customer for like nothing. And you didn't really have to get held to task on much else. And, even I noticed this as we started to get towards that 50-person mark. It's very, very challenging to keep quality control across the entire organization, especially when you're just a people business. You don't have technology and you want to keep growing. And so your hiring pipeline will dry up rather quickly. And then you just start sort of throwing bodies at problems, and they have no experience, and maybe they're just coming out of school, which isn't a bad thing necessarily, but like there's no reason some of these brands were paying 25 grand a month to a giant agency just for that agency to turn around and hand it off to somebody who had been on the job for 3 weeks. That's a lot of what was happening at the time. Not for the large clients. I mean, the biggest of the big, they still got the A team that worked at these agencies. But basically, the way I looked at it was there's an A, a B, and a C team at these massive companies. And the brands that we were picking up were the ones that had their C team, because they were in that $5,000 to $20,000 a month retainer ballpark. And for me, that was a shit ton of money in college. So that was basically the niche that we focused in on. And one of the other things that was advantageous for us as well, given the fact that the Shopify ecosystem is kind of like the iOS store with Apple, we went very deep with our relationships with what we viewed as the top, sort of technologies that supported a Shopify storefront. So Klaviyo, Rebuy, Attentive, Recharge, sort of run on down the list. We became elite partners with whatever criteria that was for them, with all of them, and became experts at enabling the stack for the brands that we work with. And so that sort of favor was then in kind returned, and almost 70% or more of our business came through tech partners. Klaviyo sending us business, Rebuy sending us business. And they knew when they sent us business, they were still sending it to me. They weren't sending it to the C team of this giant agency who, the owner might have already even exited. So it wasn't really necessarily like there was something super unique we were doing. Like we eventually found our way into being what I think was the first customer retention agency on Shopify, where we pulled back from just being an email and SMS agency. We were more holistic, and that messaging resonated very well. But that was a process too. Like for the first year, we did everything for everybody, which was a bit of a nightmare, but was a learning process and figuring out what it is that we were actually good at, but also what it is that I wanted to do.
And in terms of the shift from, and you cut out a little bit, so if I missed something there, just let me know. But it sounded like there was a shift in terms of your service offering, moving from just communication, email, SMS, into like more of a holistic kind of offering. Can you talk a little bit about, like, is that the case, and why did you sort of pivot to that?
Yeah, I mean, originally we did everything. So we had SEO, we had email, we had web. We actually did both B2B and B2C, because we were a HubSpot Platinum partner when we first started, and they didn't invest a lot into ecom. They didn't invest a lot into Shopify, and so they sort of default to the wayside. But then we still had some B2B clients. But basically, it was impossible to build what I originally thought I wanted to, which was create essentially little like micro agencies within the agency where you had a stakeholder who was essentially the owner of that division, but operated more as if an agency within an agency. So it'd be as if like there were 10 of me, and one was running the email and SMS agency, one was running the web, one was running the SEO. We found those people for web design and development, Taylor, and then we found them for email and SMS eventually. But we couldn't make it work on the ad side. We couldn't make it, work very well with social. And I think you really need an owner for each of those particular service offerings. So we kind of fell into it a little bit, but also part of it was our team was just getting pulled in so many different directions. And it's not like we were 1,000 people. So it was difficult for them to become experts. And so we decided, we're not going to use any email tool except Klaviyo. We're not going to use, any e-commerce platform except Shopify. And so we made some strategic bets on which tools were still going to be here, like in 2023 and beyond, given the fact that we had limited resources and, people want specialists. It also makes you a more acquirable company if you are sort of like a Swiss Army knife and can be plugged into an existing organization, just like we were, versus if we did everything and got put into another business, there's going to be a lot of overlap. It's not going to fit as nicely. And so it was strategic because not only did we need to get more focused to be able to grow and to become experts, but also thinking about down the line, if we do get acquired, what's going to make us more valuable to someone? That's sort of, I guess, the 3-part process of how we ended up pivoting into that.
So with that being said, when you were in the early days, at least you were probably heavily involved with just about every big client you have, I would imagine, especially if you're speaking directly to these partners that are referring you business. Do you have any really interesting stories? I mean, so this podcast is really all about kind of the audacious and experimental marketing strategies that were used. I'm curious if you have any fun stories that you want to share with brands, helping them execute on maybe something that was outside of the box.
Yeah. So I don't know if I would replicate this, but one of our clients basically, I want to say it was like a migration over to Shopify or something, but what we do for every email and SMS client is we take their transactional communications out of Shopify and move them into Klaviyo because of a variety of reasons, but anywhere between 10 to 20% of a brand's website traffic typically goes to that order tracking page. And if you just send them to the standard Shopify order tracking page, you're missing out on valuable real estate to cross-sell them into other products, to promote your subscription program, to personalize the messaging. And then you also can't A/B test your transactional communications either, which have, 10x the engagement rate that marketing emails do because everybody gets them and also they're highly relevant. So we move everybody into Klaviyo. So that way we can create a one-shot transactional experience, a subscription transactional experience. And that's the same thing that we did for this brand, but somehow these transactional emails were triggered to everybody who had ever ordered from the brand. And so everybody got basically a email telling them that the order had been shipped or order was confirmed. That was, could have been from 4 years ago, could have been from 2 years ago. And everybody got them because they're transactional. So they were marked as transactional, which actually worked very well because what we were able to do after that was essentially craft this site-wide sale apology email and text and also distribute it via the transactional communication channel because of the fact that it was an update on the error transactional email. And it was one of their largest sales days. And we've replicated that now, not via transactional communications, but, we'll send an email that looks like it's a mistake or looks like there's an error. And then you send an email thereafter, correcting it. So I mean, when that happened, and there's been other instances where we had messed up that you can't necessarily fix. That's always the worst. Like I don't miss the days of running, the day to day of the agency and waking up every morning and being like, oh, like what did we screw up today that is going to make my stomach sink and then I'm going to have to deal with for all day. But we had like a new team member start and she didn't look at the mobile version of the Klaviyo email. She only looked at the desktop. So then she sends out this campaign and the mobile version is like, the creative from last week and the promotion from last week, but the desktop version is the, and yeah, that was another story of, where delegating did not work, but.
Yeah, I'm getting flashbacks from early days. I mean, even now our product is still relatively new. We've been around for 2 years, but I've always wanted to build a product that lived in the background for that exact reason. So that if anything broke, it wasn't our fault. Like I wanted to be sort of an API where people hit it. And if the API is not working, we can rush to fix it, but it's not in front of customers. Maybe it's a loading screen, or maybe it's like try again later. And so we started doing a little widget. So all of our storefronts that have our programs are like, we call them ownership programs, but they're basically VIP programs. There's a little widget where you have to click and verify that you're an owner, that you're part of the club. And that is customer facing, and potentially millions of people are going on these sites every day and it's hitting our server. So like having to learn that process and going through like, hey, I'm getting a text at, Pacific time, 10:30 p.m. on the East Coast, 1:30 saying, hey, our site's slow. What's going on? And me just panicking completely. Like this is, our biggest customer. And of course, none of the team's on. So I'm trying to right click inspect element. I'm not, I know enough code to know when something's broken, but I don't know how to fix it. So yeah, that gives me flashbacks, because I can definitely sympathize with when things are in front of customers, like your customers, they get super angry. And so in turn, you're kind of taking the blunt end of that. And also too, I'm sure, with Shopify apps, it could be any Shopify app that breaks your store, but they're going to come after me because, I'm the one that's working with them. And then next thing you know, I'm like, hey, this is actually a different app. But anyway, it's a nightmare sometimes with working with e-commerce, because their brand is everything. And so anything that's touching their customers, you have to be so careful with. And that is sometimes a challenge that I lose sleep over, but I'm getting better at it.
What's it like being the founder of a tech product, but not being technical? Because something that scares me about SCALIS is that, I can't hop in and fix things if shit hits the fan. Somebody else is going to have to do it. And at Electriq, I could fix everything. Like I had, at the end of the day, I had full control. I don't have full control of that.
Yeah, I think initially I thought it was a huge disadvantage, especially when you're going after funding. And that's all you hear is, hey, we typically, do you have a co-founder? Do you have a technical co-founder? Because that's the standard investment, right? Is co-founders. One is like the sales guy, one is the technical kind of guy with glasses, the quant, for lack of a better term. And then if they're not that mold, then it's the mold of like just strictly technical. Andrew Bielecki at Klaviyo as an example. And then at HubSpot, Dharmesh and Halligan would be the other one. Those are kind of the two standard when you're talking to VCs. So initially I was like fighting an uphill battle because of that, but I do think it's actually a benefit. Obviously, if you can have a technical co-founder that you trust, and amazing, that's even better. But I do think if you're starting a like technical product, I think it actually benefits you to not be super technical. I think having enough technical acumen where you can understand how the pieces fit together, how your API hits, their system, how your front end interacts with your back end. That's important so you can communicate with customers, but it's almost better that you don't really understand like the exact pieces of code, because you're going to be much more understanding of function over form. You're going to be much more understanding that it's not about the technology, it's about the experience. I think that is actually super helpful, especially in a space like we're in the Web3 world. I don't necessarily like that term, but Web3 was all about form, not function. Like that was why the whole market crashed. And so as someone who wasn't focused on the technical underlyings, I was focused on the experience, we were able to kind of really shift our focus and maintain momentum. Whereas I feel like a lot of founders that were super technical in the crypto and Web3 space, they ended up with a product that sounded really cool, but didn't actually unlock experiences or build value for customers. So I think in that sense, it's probably a long-winded way of saying I think you're going to be just fine. I just think the hard part is in the beginning when they're building the product, knowing that you don't have as much control over its success.
Yeah, because you're not necessarily falling in love with the product and the back end and the way it was built. It's more high level and strategic for you, and about the end business outcome and objective versus, what are the technical sort of workings of this.
Yeah, and you'll still fall in love with it. I don't think that you'll still 100%, it'll be your baby. I mean, Nifty Bridge for me, I know every piece of like how it all came together, the early days, the whiteboarding, like I still love the product. It's just maybe in a different way than someone who's extremely technically, savvy. But yeah, that's really exciting that you're jumping into the product, because now you have the service side, you've fully fledged that out, sold it, now you're getting to jump in. Is that something that you're really excited about, nervous about?
No, I just want it to be, up and running and live. And I've have so much experience with this side of things as a proxy from working with all the top Shopify players that, it's not like I'm reinventing the wheel necessarily when it comes to the go-to-market and, the partner programs and the things that, I was the benefit and recipient of on the other side. So I think there's a lot of value to that. And then also sort of the divvying of responsibilities between myself and Parker when it comes to, who's focused on what and who's doing what. And a lot of my value up until this point has really just been network and connections and being able to strategically plug us into conversations that are only happening because of Electriq. And so Electriq is a nice like sort of stepping stone to what is a significantly larger opportunity, not only with drinks, but then also with SCALIS as well. Drinks, the alcohol category is absolutely ginormous. And then if you look at SCALIS, I mean, HR is an absolutely ginormous industry. And we're only starting in e-commerce because of my network and the fact that we won't have to spend money on sales and marketing to get our first like 100 companies up and running using the product. But there's no reason why every single type of vertical could not use this product. We're just choosing to be strategic because also some of the learnings from Electriq where, we are everything for everyone. We want to be, the best talent acquisition suite of tools for e-com. And a lot of efficiencies will become realized much faster because of the fact that we only launched in Shopify ecosystem. But, long term, LinkedIn, Indeed, ZipRecruiter, et cetera, they service everybody. So the market potential there is really significant. So yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, when I was at Klaviyo, I think they did a great job at that. I think HubSpot would be on the opposite side of they've sort of expanded horizontally in terms of building more products, whereas Klaviyo, they just continued to drive into the market and stick with e-com, stick with email. They obviously now have SMS. They just IPO'd, so they're going to eventually go horizontal. But I was really fortunate enough to go work at both sides of that, learn, hey, here's how you scale a company by just continually adding more products, HubSpot. And then, hey, here's Klaviyo, which literally just does one thing really well, which is pulling in customer data and engaging with customers. And they're just doing it with e-com, and seeing kind of like how each of those results in different companies, both super successful, both IPOing, but one has about a fourth of the employees and like a 60% market penetration, whereas the other one is much smaller market penetration, much more employees, both very successful.
Yeah, and Klaviyo is going horizontal now as well. It's just funny to see the sort of tide ebb and flow between specialization and going horizontal, which will be interesting as they've gone public now to see what happens. Because obviously what got them here is not what's going to get them to the next step. And there's a lot of changes that they've been making, and we'll see whether or not they pan out. Because the e-commerce industry is just so immature compared to the B2B industry as well. A lot of these tech companies, no matter how large they are, you have to remember that they weren't even around 10 years ago. Some of them weren't even around 5 years ago. And everybody's just a human being. So just because there's a founder there who's got 500 employees doesn't mean he has any idea what the hell he's doing or she's doing. So every once in a while, I have to remind myself that when I get like, just the absolute worst experience from one of these like tech companies, it's like at the end of the day, they're rather immature businesses. They don't have some of the checks and balances in place that you would expect from a larger enterprise.
Yeah, I think that I'm excited to see where Klaviyo goes. I think there's a lot of runway. I do think that e-commerce, it's funny you say that it's so new, because I do think that it's much more innovative. Everything, all the tech stack and e-commerce, I think is much more innovative than the B2B space, just because I was in the B2B space, and there's a lot more legacy systems because, like you said, technology's been around for longer there. But it is interesting how e-commerce and D2C is becoming a model for B2B brands in terms of the scale and the personalization aspects that are coming now into like HubSpot's platform. So I wouldn't be surprised HubSpot eventually getting into more D2C brands. So one thing I wanted to ask you is, knowing how saturated e-commerce is in general. I mean, with COVID, right, you hit the supercharge on businesses that were online. It's super easy to set up a Shopify store. As you know, there's millions of Shopify stores. Do you have any stories around like how you helped a brand really establish a foothold or sort of stand out in the crowd to build a community amid sort of a crowded market where it's really easy to get lost in kind of the mixture of brands out there?
Well, I can't fix a shitty product. And the unfortunate reality for most brands out there is that their products are not that great. And you can see that very easily in the data when it comes to return rate for products that are returnable, or in the customer reviews. And in the early days of Electriq, we'd work with anybody. And so, unfortunately, for some brands, it's like there's just had to be an honest conversation. You've only been around for like a year. Your product is not resonating with the audience. It might be the audience, but in fact, I think it's probably more so the product itself. So you either need to go through some sort of product reformulation, and this is especially true in CPG, food and bev, where the taste is everything. Packaging, sells and gets you into that first purchase, but then if you taste it and you don't like it, it's not going to work out well. And you've seen the rise of all these healthy alternative drinks like a Poppy or an Olipop. And the reason why Olipop is so successful is because it just tastes really great. Like, I could come in there and, do some magic email and SMS shit, but it's going to perform no matter what because people love the product. So you have to get that at a minimum. Then from there, like, let's say, there's 5 Olipops. It's like, how do you then differentiate? There's this concept of like the cool factor, which I think is becoming more and more relevant, especially as you have all these like, iPad kids and whatever, and TikTok blowing up. There's something to be said for whether or not the product is seen as something that is like signaling something from a social perspective. And this is actually something that we see a lot in the alcohol category, specifically with wine, is that, people our age and younger aren't really drinking wine because it's not cool. Like, when's the last time you saw like a trendy TikTok video or something about, a particular wine brand? You haven't, because they're not digitized. They're not, they haven't gone through the same sort of, I would say like, what's the term?
Digital transformation.
Like digital transformation. Yeah, I hate that word. But they haven't gone through that yet. So having that is really important. And one of like ways that you can do that are aligning with, creators. And creators, you see this with Shopify. Shopify is so invested in the creator economy. They've invested by buying Dovetail, which they turned into, what did they turn? Not Shopify Collabs. Yeah, exactly. And they also have, people who would be on Shopify Collabs as a creator are then spinning up their own storefronts to sell things. And so a lot of it now is build the audience, and then you figure out what you're going to sell to the customers. And I've seen the most successful brands have a founder or co-founders who are at the forefront of the brand. Like, their face, their story is embodied in whatever it is that they're selling. You're not going to be able to compete with, some of these industry giants like a Nike or something who have that brand recognition that runs all the way back to, the 80s. You see this even on LinkedIn. If I post something on LinkedIn, it could literally be the same copy and image as what Electriq posts. My post will get like 10x the engagement because I'm a person and people find it significantly easier to relate and to attach themselves to a person in a story. So the founder-led brands have been absolutely crushing it over the last like 2 years, especially if they're able and willing to get on TikTok, to do the behind the scenes stuff, to send an SMS marketing message from themselves as the founder. Like that is authentic and that's what consumers want. And then the third thing would be, technology around community building. Facebook groups are dead. And just having a Facebook group doesn't mean that you have a community. How do you think strategically about actually building out a community where your customers are in an own channel of yours and can go back and forth with one another and support one another? Doing things like creating a segment in Klaviyo of everybody who's within a 25-mile radius of a particular city and then hosting an event there, bringing all of your customers together, creating all this UGC, getting them to connect with one another, building social moments like that. You got to get more creative than just, we're going to go spend a bunch of money on Facebook ads. So I think those are, three main things. There's obviously a lot of other stuff, but at the end of the day, is the product actually good or not? is something that I think people overlook a lot because we do a lot of consulting or engagement gigs, and if your repeat purchase rate is like 15% or 20%, I don't really care what we do from a marketing agency standpoint, but I think you've got product issues or you got customer support issues or something like that.
Yeah. I feel like I want to ask you around the idea of this, because I really want to key in on, you mentioned you do some things around community building where you're in Klaviyo, you do like a 25-mile segment and you're telling people, hey, we're hosting something. Is there a story that you have that you can share with a brand is trying to build more of that community element? They've got a rock solid product. They've got a great, brand already, but now it's like, how do I galvanize? How do I find those people that love what I do? And how do I kind of give them a place to go? Is there any story around that you think, a company that's done a really good job of that or that you've worked with?
Yeah. So a lot of it's pre-COVID. Like the wine company that I used to work for would have these VIP events where they would have like a restaurant in LA that they would rent out, and they'd bring like the top 100 customers from within a specific radius, and they would hire a photographer, and they would have like specials and promotions that were running around that particular event. And basically, just having the event itself is not enough. It's like, how do you get outsized returns from it? How can you leverage all the other things that are going to come from that event in your other channels, showing customers who aren't in that VIP group, hey, this is like what happens if you get to this particular tier. These are the types of things that we do for you as a community. Hiring the photographer to make sure that there's a bunch of content that can be leveraged for the rest of the year. So maybe as opposed to having to go do a photo shoot, you have this instead. And so you're sort of killing two birds with one stone. That was a really good example of, a business that took the event idea, but was able to get outsized returns from it because of the fact that they had a plan. Like they weren't just throwing an event together to throw an event together. They had a plan for how they were going to maximize the return of it. And a lot of it came to, once the event's done, what do we then get out of this as well? Having, the introduction of something like a ambassador program at the event. And so everybody is, then incentivized to go and sell to their friends, to refer to their friends, setting up easy pathways for that, allowing a +1 so that other people can get introduced to it. Talking about things like, corporate gifting, the holiday gifting. I think the holidays were like a month away or 2 months away. Everybody, for the most part, works at a business. So then you're off and running, promoting to your company, hey, we could do this for the holidays. I guess it's a long way of saying, like, the companies that do it best are the ones that look at events as something that has an impact on like 10 different areas versus having, just the instantaneous effect of that particular day.
What's something that you think brands get really wrong about community? Because I hear community a lot. We have everybody we have on this show typically community comes up. It's, sometimes a buzzword, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. When you hear people kind of talking about community, like what do you think the most common thing that brands get wrong about community is?
I think the number one thing is them thinking that they have one to begin with. That's something that I hear a lot of times, and that's just not the reality. And I think the second is that not every brand needs a community. Like, and I'm trying to think of an example, but like, sort of ask yourself why. Like, what's the value that's going to come from having a community for this particular brand? There's certain ones that make sense, and there's certain ones that lend themselves very well to having a community. With wine, for example, you share tasting notes, you share how to serve, you share what sort of food to pair it with. There's a lot of potential there. In other ways, and in other businesses, there's not necessarily as much. And then the third thing that I think a lot of them get wrong, or really, the main thing that they get wrong, is setting it up and forgetting about it and not ingraining it into the customer journey. But you see this with a lot of other things as well, like loyalty and referral programs. People will just, or brands will just download the app on their store, and they think it's magically going to transform their business, but they don't integrate it into their on-site messaging. They don't integrate it into the transactional experience that customers are getting out of Klaviyo. And so the adoption rate is super low, and they just never really get a lot of people to use it or to leverage it. So if you are going to build a community, for one, don't do it on Facebook group. Like, have it in an owned channel. Like, we work with Kin typically, which is a relatively new entrant to the Shopify ecosystem, but they create an iOS and Android app by just ingesting the web elements from your site. So you don't have to set up a separate storefront that you do with a tap cart, for example. But they also have a community product built within the app. So as opposed to Facebook groups, the community now lives within your own owned channel. So that's a big one, is the tech. And then second is, how is this integrated into the customer journey? Like, how do we drive people to it and make it valuable for them? Host, events within the community, things like that.
Seeing as data too, I'm thinking about for you as an agency, right? That's really where you guys are metriced on. That's kind of where a client goes, hey, they're doing their job, they're not doing their job. So I would imagine that's super important. And I heard you talk about metrics before. When it comes to metrics that you've looked at when onboarding these clients at Electriq, has there ever been any data that you've seen where it made you completely shift like what you were doing? Has there ever been a story where that's happened, where maybe you thought the data was going to say something and it was just completely not there, and actually it was something totally different?
Yeah. Especially when it comes to retention metrics, because more often than not, brands might want to say that they're very focused on customer experience and retention, but the reality is shown in the numbers when it comes to things like repurchase rate, and products returned, stuff like that. And my favorite thing to do actually is, because we don't do ads, and it's fun to get to mess with the ads team or the ads agency every once in a while. We'll ask them for their top performing campaigns in Facebook. They'll send them to us. Usually there's some sort of unique offer associated, or a landing page, or some way to identify all the customers that have come through that funnel over the last 3 to 6 months. And then we'll plug that into a cohort sort of segment analysis within Lifetimely that'll tell us not only what was the first order value, but what's happening to these customers after they come in. Like, just because your ROAS might be, a 3 on Facebook doesn't mean that these customers are better than the customers that are ROAS of like a 1.2, because your 3 ROAS customers are coming in on some ridiculous intro offer, and only 10% of them are ever coming back to reorder. Whereas the 1.2, maybe 50% are coming back for order number 2, and they're with the brand forever, and their lifetime value is crazy high. That is, without fail, like a very easy win for us almost always, is being able to integrate and feed back those insights and data from the retention side to the acquisition team. Because more often than not, they're just operating within that vacuum of, first order. How do we maximize, profit or return on that first order? And more, how do we just like lose as little money as possible getting that first order, and not looking at what happens 30 days later, 90 days later, 6 months, a year, and so on later.
Yeah, and I feel like part of that is just because I think e-commerce, especially during my days at Klaviyo, where e-commerce was in a much different space in terms of just things were flying off the shelves. And most industries, I will say, like online selling, it was insane. And so people, they didn't even know that they needed to care about if a person's coming back in a year, because it was like the going was good. And I feel like now we've hit a stage in the last year where they're like, wait, now the it's drying up. Like, why don't we have this more customers? And now they're looking at their customer base and saying, how do we get more out of them? And that's when they've realized, okay, now what you're talking about, not every customer is created equal, and people aren't looking at the customer as an output anymore. They're looking at them as like, hey, this is an opportunity to invest in them, to maybe that's UGC, maybe that's, like you said, kind of galvanizing the ambassador program, that sort of thing. So moving from output to sort of an input that they can drive more value from down the line. I think that's been just a shift for e-commerce. Honestly, people haven't had to look at those numbers post 1 year.
Yeah, and the market was also rewarding brands that could show that hockey stick growth, and it's easiest to get the hockey stick growth by just funneling a bunch of first-time customers into your business. And VCs were pumping dollars into it as well. And for the brands, I don't really think it's necessarily their fault, because they were worried about other things. Like, do I have enough inventory in stock? How am I managing all these shipping delays from China? How am I doing? Like, there's like 1,000 other things that were going on. And, some of them have already gone out of business because they made decisions within that time period that had long-term ramifications. And unfortunately, some of them were put in a position where it's like, what else are you going to do? Because there's so much change that happened all at once with COVID, with the iOS updates, with the shrinking of investment coming from VCs and whatnot. So I will never own a brand. That's like, the one thing that I definitely am never going to do.
Have you ever tried like a e-commerce brand before?
No. Okay.
I've tried it when I was at Klaviyo. Just for fun.
How
it was awful. I told Jake, the guy who runs our podcast, about it. I was up to my ears in boxes of clothes that I was in a little Boston apartment, and I realized that no matter how much I sold, I was never going to make more than I was making selling software, and I was probably just miserable. So I have a lot of admiration for people that have e-commerce brands. I think that it's incredible, but it's a challenge. It's a whole nother animal, because your margins are a lot smaller than I thought they would be. Shipping stuff stinks, and I was doing it all myself. So yeah, it wasn't for me. I'll say that. It scared me into software.
Well, you've reaffirmed my my choice is probably the right one by never doing that.
Besides,
it works very well.
Yes, it does. And also, I think the benefit of being a consumer-facing brand is, how often do you get, as a software founder, right? I don't go out and see somebody wearing Nifty Bridge t-shirts, So I do think that's cool about e-commerce, is you can see people wearing or using, or it's much more like physically you can see it, as opposed to software, which especially
that's just because you haven't sent. That's just because you haven't sent me any swag yet. I've got
that's true.
Plenty of Klaviyo stuff. I got plenty of Rebuy stuff. I will wear it. I don't know if that's what you're looking for, but
that was basically me kind of. Got a delay here.
if you create dog stuff, Bella wears Shopify sweatshirts, and I have a picture of it, and I'll send it to you, and it's adorable.
That's awesome. Okay, I know we got 3 minutes left. I wanted to ask you a few more questions before we run. So kind of rapid fire here. Okay, so we talked a little bit about how the e-commerce space is changing, the hockey stick growth, kind of like VC funding world. That doesn't really exist in the way that it used to. So, but aside from taking on, potentially millions of dollars in funding when you don't need it, what are some ways that e-commerce companies today can be setting themselves up for success long term?
No, I think you have 4 main channels for retention. You have email, SMS, direct mail, and push. And like just hire somebody who is an owner of retention and make it their North Star that customer LTV as well as 90-day repurchase rate are as high as humanly possible. And somebody who's going to like do the dirty work and dig in and, reach out to customers for 5-minute, 10-minute discovery interviews like 10 times a week. Go beyond just the data. That is without a doubt a role that needs to be in place now. Like, it's not enough to have an e-com manager. That's such a broad term, broad stroke that doesn't actually fulfill what's needed. And so I really think you need somebody who's solely focused on acquisition, somebody who's solely focused on retention. Maybe you have somebody who sits above the top of them, but not even necessarily. But gone are the days of like this generalist who can do both acquisition and can do retention, in my opinion. So split those two functions out and provide autonomy and ownership to those particular team members to do the things that they need to do. But for me, the most important, metric to look at for any business is just how quickly are people coming back to make that second order and what percentage of them are doing so. Because especially if you're a new brand, you're not going to have enough data to be able to look at like your 1-year LTV or your 3-year LTV, things like that. What you can control though is that percentage. And there's always going to be the most drop off between order number 1 and order number 2. So if you can make that drop off as little as possible, it's a trickle down effect. So let's say, as opposed to let's say you have a 10% drop from order number 2 to order number 3, regardless of what happens from order 1 to order number 2. If you can reduce drop off from order 1 and order number 2, that means you're going to have that many more customers who stay for order 3, for order 4, and so on, because it is sort of a cliff after that first order, and then it starts to smooth out. Just invest as much as possible into that experience. Send customers free shit galore, like on order number 2. Like, tell them about all the awesome stuff they're going to get in the transactional messages that they receive from that first order. If you can get into people's lives like twice and start to become a habit, that's super powerful.
Wow, I need to be on the lookout now because I feel like I'm already been looped into some of these companies. It's already a habit for me. So, okay, last thing, where can people find you? Also, when is what's the new company, SCALIS? When is that expected to launch? Is that like, can you tell us when that's expected to launch? And then where can people find you if they want to learn more about Electriq?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different places. Electriq is electriqmarketing.com, but it's a Q instead of a C at the end of Electriq. There's drinks.com, which is pretty self-explanatory. And then SCALIS, which is SCALIS.ai. That'll be live in December, but the website's up, all the messaging, everything that you would possibly need to know about what is coming. But that'll be in market with the first 10 paying customers in December. And then for me, like, I have my own website, which is just my name.com, very creative. And then the LinkedIn is kind of a nightmare. So I'd reach out on the website. I don't know about you, but my LinkedIn is just a cesspool. It's like, I have like thousands of invitation requests, so much spam, all these like DMs. It is not fun. But yeah, that's it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. Really appreciate your time. And have a great rest of the week.